I discovered my dad, my model of integrity, had been taking bribes at work for years. I found out while formatting his computer when he retired. What I did with that information was the hardest thing of my life. There are discoveries that reorganize the complete past. Not only the event you discover, everything that surrounds that event. Every conversation where that person talked to you about values. Every moment where they corrected you when you took a shortcut that was not appropriate. Every time they told you that integrity was non-negotiable. My father told me all those things for decades, and he said them while doing something that contradicted every single one of them. I found out by accident, through a folder on a computer he had considered formatted, and that I had received a format, and that I opened before formatting, because I am the kind of person who reviews before deleting. And what I found in that folder was years of work. Not the work he had always described with the pride of someone who had built a clean career. The other work. The one he had done in parallel. The one that explained things I had never had reason to explain. My name is Ricardo. I am 40 years old. I am a systems engineer, and I work at a technology consulting firm. I am the oldest of 3 children and the only son. My father's name is Ernesto. He is 68 years old. He retired 3 months ago after 22 years as head of purchasing at a mid-sized manufacturing company where he had built a reputation as a serious, knowledgeable, and honest professional. The word honest was used by those who knew him from work with a frequency I had always received as confirmation of what I already knew. When he retired, he gave me his work computer because the company had allowed him to keep the equipment as part of the retirement package. He gave it to me with the instruction to format it so he could use it for personal things. He told me he had already deleted everything that needed to be deleted. I told him yes, I would do it. That was 3 months ago. Before formatting any computer, I have the habit of reviewing the content. Not out of distrust, out of professional practice. To make sure there are no important files the person may have forgotten to back up before giving it to me. I do it with everyone. I did it with my father's computer too. The review took 20 minutes. In those 20 minutes, I found what my father believed he had deleted. A folder called Various Projects that was inside a subfolder of subfolders in a file path someone could reasonably expect would not be found in a casual review. It was not a casual review. It was me. The folder had 143 files, exported emails, bank transfers, deposit receipts to an account that was not the company's, an Excel log with dates, amounts, suppliers, and concepts that used language transparent to someone who knew how to read it and sufficiently cryptic for someone who did not. It took me 10 minutes to understand what I was looking at. It took me an hour to verify it. The Excel log covered 17 years. 17 years of regular payments from suppliers to an account that, according to the bank records, I found belonged to a services company that, after 15 minutes of searching the public registry, I found registered in my father's name as majority partner. A company that, according to its tax records, provided purchasing consulting services to the same suppliers my father had evaluated and approved in his job for 17 years. The total amount I could calculate from the records I had was approximately 4 million pesos over 17 years. 4 million. In payments averaging 19,000 pesos per month for nearly 2 decades. I sat in front of that computer for a time I cannot measure. What I felt had no simple name. It was the superposition of several things that could not be separated. The first, my father, the man who had been my professional integrity reference for 40 years. The person whose opinion on my work decisions had mattered more than anyone else's outside my wife. The second, the company where he had worked. A mid-sized company with real employees whose purchasing chain had been manipulated for 17 years to benefit suppliers who paid for the manipulation. The third, what that meant legally. My father had retired 3 months ago, but the crime, if it was what it appeared to be, did not expire with retirement. The fourth, what I did with that. That last question was what occupied the following 3 days. I did not talk to anyone during those 3 days. Not my wife, who noticed something was happening but respected the silence because she knows me well. Not my sisters. Not my father. I stayed with the information and with the question of what to do with it and let the thinking process take the time it needed before acting. What I processed in those 3 days was a conflict that has no clean resolution. On one side, what my father had done was a crime. There were affected people. A company that had paid more than it should have for 17 years because its head of purchasing favored suppliers who paid him. Employees whose working conditions could have been better with resources that had gone elsewhere. Suppliers who had not been able to compete on equal terms. On the other side, my father, 68 years old, retired, with a whole life built, with my mother who depended on him, with my sisters who adored him without knowing what I knew. Those two sides do not have a resolution where everyone wins. Any decision I made was going to have real consequences for real people. On the fourth day, I called an attorney. Not a friend who was an attorney. An attorney who did not know me and to whom I presented the situation hypothetically before revealing any names. I described what I had found. I asked what the legal implications were. He told me 3 things. First, what I described was potentially constitutive of bribery, conflict of interest, and possibly fraud against the company, depending on how the contractual relationship with the suppliers was structured. Second, the fact that the person had retired did not extinguish criminal or civil liability for acts committed during employment. Third, I, as the holder of that information and as the son of the person involved, was in a legally complex position. I had no legal obligation to report, but also no obligation to destroy evidence. What I did with that information was a decision that mixed the legal with the ethical and the personal in a way that had no single answer. I asked him what he would do in my place. He told me that was the question I had to answer and that no attorney could answer it for me. I decided to talk to my father before anything else. Not the company, not authorities. My father, not necessarily to protect him, but because 40 years of relationship deserved at least that conversation before I made any decision that irreversibly affected his life. I called him and asked him to meet alone, without my mother, without my sisters. I told him it was about something on the computer he had given me. There was a silence on the phone that was long enough to tell me he knew I had found something. We met at his house on a Sunday morning when my mother had gone to Mass. When I arrived, he was waiting for me with coffee made. With the tense calm of someone who knows the conversation coming has no easy way out and who has decided to face it standing. I placed the Excel log on the table. I said nothing. He looked at it, and what I saw on his face was not surprise. It was something more like relief mixed with the weight of someone who has carried something for a long time and who finally does not have to keep carrying it alone. He told me he had known there was a possibility I would find it, that he had told me he had deleted everything because he wanted to believe he had deleted everything, that somewhere he had wanted someone to find it, and somewhere else he had wanted them not to. What my father told me over the following hour, I am going to recount without softening it, because I do not think this story deserves to be softened. He told me it had started 17 years ago when the company had gone through a restructuring and had significantly reduced salaries in the purchasing area. That a supplier had proposed the scheme to him directly. That at that time he had had debts and had said, yes, thinking it would be temporary. That the temporary had become structure. That over time he had stopped thinking of it as something he was actively doing and had started feeling it as part of the landscape of his work. That there had been moments when he had wanted to stop and had not known how to get out without exposing himself. That when they had offered him retirement, he had felt something like relief that it was ending. That he had not expected the computer to be the problem because he believed he had deleted everything. I asked him whether he had thought about the company, about the employees, about the suppliers who had lost contracts because they did not pay. My father did not respond immediately. When he spoke, he told me he had learned not to think about that he had built a compartment in his head where that part of what he was doing did not exist, that knowing that was possible did not make him proud. I told him what I was going to do, not impulsively, with the clarity of someone who has thought for 4 days about all the options and who has reached the only conclusion they can sustain with themselves. I told him I was not going to the company or to authorities at this moment, that what I was going to do was give him a 30-day window to seek legal counsel and make the decision to approach the company voluntarily to reveal what had occurred and explore reparation options. That if in 30 days that had not happened, I would make the decision about what to do with the information I had. That decision could include reporting him. I told him I was not asking him to destroy himself. I was asking him to own what corresponded to be owned. That the difference between those two things was determined by him with what he chose to do in the next 30 days. My father looked at me for a time. He told me I was a fair man. I told him I did not know whether I was fair. That was what I could do with what I knew being the son of who I was and the person I was. The process that followed lasted more than 30 days. My father sought an attorney in the first week. The attorney guided him through the voluntary disclosure process and its implications. In week 6, my father approached the company through his attorney. What followed was a process that lasted 4 months and involved the company, the legal area, and the identified suppliers. My father reached a reparation agreement that included the return of a portion of the amounts received through a payment plan. There was no criminal process because the company decided the civil agreement was sufficient and because the disclosure had been voluntary. My father has today a mark on his record that he knows about and that the directly involved parties know about. Not the world, but those who correspond. The relationship with my father exists. It is different from what it was, not because I love him less, but because the image I had of him changed in a way that has no reverse. I did not lose him, but what I recovered is not the same person I lost when I opened that folder. It is someone more complex, with a history that includes this part. And learning to love that more complete person without the comfort of the previous image is the work I am still doing. What I want you to take from this story is not simple because the story is not simple. For those who find something similar in the life of someone they love, there is no universal correct answer for what you do when you discover that someone you love has caused harm. What there is a process of questions you have to ask yourself honestly. Are there affected people who deserve for what occurred to be known? Is there a way for the responsible person to own what corresponds without you having to be the agent of their destruction? What can you sustain with yourself if you do nothing? What can you sustain with yourself if you act? There is no answer that does not have a cost. The question is what cost you can live with. If this story reached you, comment. Do you believe there are situations where protecting a family member who caused harm is justifiable, or does the responsibility toward affected people always have to win? Like if you believe voluntary disclosures with reparation should have lesser legal consequences than disclosures forced by investigation. Subscribe for more real stories. Share with someone who is navigating something ethically complex in their family. Reflection to take with you. The people we admire are not impervious to wrong decisions. And discovering that someone we love made them does not cancel what that person was for us, but also does not cancel the harm they caused. Holding both of those truths at the same time, without either one erasing the other, is one of the hardest pieces of work that life produces. And it has no completion date.